This is the True Self Manifestation Podcast, and I am your host, Angel Menudo. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, certified clinic coach, and a little woo with a passion for manifestation and internal family systems. Through the years, I've tried all the things to manifest the life I've always wanted, and with much exploration and curiosity, I've learned something major about manifestation. To successfully manifest, we need to be in our worth and in alignment with our true self and the universe. Unlike typical manifestation practices, IFS delves deep into addressing potential blocks that impact self-worth. Each week, I'll show you how to harness IFS to connect with your true self, boost your self-worth, and conquer the barriers holding you back in life. Join me on this journey to live authentically, break free from limitations, and embrace your best life. It's not a coincidence you're here. Welcome to the True Self Manifestation Podcast. Manifesting love. This is a big one, am I right? We're all looking for love. That special person we can share experiences with, connect to, laugh with, have great sex with. We're on the dating apps. We're checking people out in the produce aisle of the grocery stores. And we're asking friends if they know someone that would check off all of the boxes on our list. It's the same list that gets increasingly larger and larger with every bad date, creepy interaction, or just plain letdown. Maybe you feel like you're open to receive that almost perfect someone, because remember, nobody's perfect. Perfection is a myth. Yet, you feel like you keep attracting that same type of person. You might be asking yourself, why do I keep finding myself in the same types of relationships? You long for someone that is emotionally available, who will show up for you, yet emotionally unavailable people keep crossing your path. Or maybe it's codependency, narcissism, people you think you're connecting with until you realize you're actually trauma bonding with instead. Or you fall into the pattern of people pleasing as a means to keep them from leaving you. You want to keep them happy to show your value. Or there could be that push-pull where you find someone you like to connect with, but then you push them away through arguments or other behaviors. Or you could be so used to chaos that when things are calm and peaceful, you think that you're incompatible and the person is boring. Maybe deep down, you feel unworthy of a healthy relationship, putting others on pedestals, thinking you're not good enough for that person, that you're unlovable if they see the real you. All of this keeps you from your path. These examples that I just gave are what I would consider like bigger relationship blocks. However, these blocks can show up in small ways too, where we are conditioned to think about relationships, significance of them, maybe gender roles, or how parents or caregivers treated one another. All of those play a role in conditioning. These relationship blocks are rooted in the subconscious. These parts of you have picked up programming and conditioning based on your environment growing up. Some of these parts are vulnerable parts. They are seeking out what hurt them as like a do-over in a way. And the vulnerable part is looking for vindication, maybe love, validation, that it didn't receive growing up. However, it seeks it through the same type of person that hurt you in the first place. This is how this cycle continues. Then other parts of you, protector parts, will play roles as well. Often, it's not just one part. It's a system of parts working together off of this past programming and conditioning. Let me break this down. If you grew up in a household where your parents or caregivers often fought, parts of you latches onto the idea that this is how relationships are. Then they hold on to this belief. The parts become confused when things are calm. Say, if you have a partner that prefers to talk out an argument or disagreement instead of a fight or lashing out at you, and they are more likely to fight when there is a perceived threat or attack. The parts play out the cycle, pushing fights, getting defensive, thinking this is the only way to resolve any form of conflict. Or if you grew up with one of the parents or caregivers being domineering, aggressive, authoritative, or abusive, then the parts will attempt to avoid conflict. These parts will work to try to keep you safe, to not trigger the parent or caregiver. This often results in not speaking up for yourself in relationships, people-pleasing, and ultimately losing a sense of yourself in the relationship out of fear of upsetting the other person or setting them off. Even if that person doesn't act like your parents or caregivers, the parts don't know that these people are different. This is because these parts are stuck in the past. Rationally, which is also a part, you know that your partner is not the parent or caregiver. But when the other parts are activated, the rational part gets pushed out and the other parts become blended with true self. This results in feeling like you have a loss of control, overwhelmed with emotion. Can you think of a time that this has happened? Feeling overwhelmed with emotions, that it becomes too difficult to see the situation for what it really is? Or an urge to behave a certain way, such as people-pleasing or codependency? This is what I mean when I say that a part is blended with true self. Afterwards, you might be able to see the reality of the situation. This is where other parts tend to come in, a part of you that feels shame or regret for your behavior or reaction. You could notice negative self-talk, a part of you that is like just being very hypercritical of yourself. Or you could have self-compassion. Use this to gain awareness and insight into their internal world. Similar scenarios also activate parts. As I mentioned before, if you're attempting to find someone who is emotionally available but grew up with parents or caregivers that were emotionally unavailable, a part of you is going to gravitate to the emotionally unavailable because 1, it's familiar, and 2, it's trying to get its needs met because it's familiar. But unless that person is working on themselves to undo their own programming and conditioning, it's futile. And the cycle continues until you stop it. So, story time. All right, for me, I grew up in an emotionally unavailable household. If I showed emotions, then I would be told that I was being dramatic, too much, or really just to suck it up, or some other invalidating thing was said to me. Some of my parts learned that they needed to shut emotions down. They equated showing emotions to being unlovable. They felt that it wasn't safe to show emotions. Although not all emotions were shut down. Anger wasn't an acceptable emotion in my household. Anger could be shown. It wasn't shown in a healthy or productive way, but my parts realized that anger was an acceptable emotion. This became a tangled web that needed to be carefully and thoughtfully untangled. I didn't know it at the time, though. When I began dating, I, being emotionally unavailable myself, went for other emotionally unavailable people. These relationships were not great by any means. Early in my dating years, I went through a particularly difficult time. The weight of everything I was holding became unbearable, and I remember breaking down one day and crying to him, the person I was dating. This apparently crossed a line because I was told that I was weak and that he thought I was stronger than this. and that he couldn't date me anymore because I was, quote unquote, too much, and he broke up with me. Now, he didn't actually say this to me, but this is how he did it. This is funny. He borrowed money from me before I left for work one day, and we had planned for me to come back after work. However, when I returned, he changed the locks using, yes, the money he borrowed from me. Needless to say, I didn't get that money back. And then he proceeded to duct tape a note to the door saying all those things I had said, that I was weak. He thought that I was stronger than this. Pretty much that I disappointed him and his perception of me came crashing down. I was so hurt by this and so angry. Rationally, apart, I knew this was really for the best, but it perpetuated that feeling of being unlovable, which is the vulnerable part. For a long time after this, my parts upped their shields of defense to show no emotions, to always be strong, because emotions equaled weakness. Weakness equaled being unlovable. It took years of deprogramming to undo this and to be able to show emotions besides anger. And I really wish at the time I was doing all of this, I knew about IFS back then, because honestly, it would have been such a quicker process. But as I continued to work on becoming emotionally available, I was still in emotionally unavailable relationships. My partner at the time was not on the same path that I was on. And for this reason, and many others, we eventually parted ways. And I had to continue working on myself, untangling that web to break the programming those parts held onto so tightly. Then I could feel internally lovable and worthy to be open and accept a partner that was also emotionally available. In other words, manifest the partner I wanted without these blocks being in the way. Are you ready to end the unconscious cycles and patterns sabotaging your manifestations and experience true magnetism without the blocks from past programming, conditioning, and limiting beliefs so that you can manifest your most amazing life? If you said yes, then I invite you to check out my e-course, How to Manifest Without the Self-Sabotage. This e-course uses techniques from internal family systems to help you align with your true self energy and begin working with those parts of you that have been sabotaging your manifestations. By using these evidence-based practices, you are shifting perception of yourself and the world around you at the root, helping you reprogram and retrain your brain so it is no longer running off of invisible scripts based on past programming, conditioning, and limiting beliefs. Use code 50OFF for $50 off your purchase of How to Manifest Without the Self-Sabotage e-course. The link is in the show notes. Don't wait. Grab this transformative e-course today and start manifesting your most amazing life. I want to identify the parts in the system that were working on my behalf based on what they learned in my childhood so that you, dear listener, can get a full picture of how parts work together. If this was on camera, I would have one of those like big dry erase boards like in the crime shows with pictures and the red string connecting everything, but it's not on camera, so I will have to explain it and just try to envision a big whiteboard while I do. The vulnerable part was the one holding the hurt and pain from being invalidated, from showing emotions. That was the one that was feeling unlovable. The vulnerable part became exiled away in the system by protector parts in an attempt to protect the whole system from feeling that hurt and pain. This part was activated in that changing the locks relationship I was just telling you about. The reaction, the hurt this part felt wasn't just the hurt from what he said, but the part was also carrying the hurt from childhood. This is why sometimes our reactions don't match the situation. It's because the part is not only reacting to the present situation, but also all the past situations associated with it. This is the baggage that we wind up carrying from relationship to relationship. With a vulnerable part, there are always protector parts. As I previously mentioned, protector parts try really hard not to activate the vulnerable part. They all have positive intentions. They really do. Even if you are like, why? What are you talking about? No, they really do. However, they often unknowingly go about it in the wrong way, oftentimes actually hurting the system and not helping it. They do what they know and what has worked in the past. For me, these were the parts that shut down emotions. They were always on guard, not willing to let anyone see me upset. If I did show emotions, because the protector parts can't always do their jobs and are usually overworked, they're exhausted, a hypercritical part would come up. This part would berate me for showing emotions. This critical part often sounded like my parents. Another part in the system was the anger part, or as I like to call her, my ragey part. She was also on full alert all the time, willing to fight anyone who ever even considered hurting me. Have you ever heard of the phrase, anger is sad's bodyguard? For me, this was the truth. Sometimes it could be anxiety as sad's bodyguard, or other parts attempting to protect the system from feeling that sadness. For me, it was anger. A little side note on that anger. Anger can actually be a very healthy and productive emotion if funneled correctly. Anger is the catalyst to change. Anger tells us when someone is pushing a boundary. Women are so often conditioned at a young age that it is not appropriate to show anger. To that, my ragey part says they can piss off. And I've said this on here before, but my ragey part always wants to burn the motherfucker down. Do I let her? No. I would probably be in jail right now if I did. Instead, her anger and rage funnel through true self me, where I can direct it effectively. Do I sometimes yell at bad drivers? Yes. But have I stopped getting out of my car and going after someone who almost hit me once? I started learning how to control this more effectively? No, I have not. I'm pretty proud of that too. I'm sure you all have been there though, at some point in time. How we see the world and how we show up in the world are based on our conditioning and programming. And it's our parts that are programmed and conditioned. These blocks could also show up in more subtle ways of how we are conditioned based on what we have seen in our environment growing up. But they're still blocks nonetheless. So to shed some light on all of that, I'll tell you a recent situation I had. So my partner, Tim, and I had his parents over for dinner a couple weeks ago. Everything was going well until his mother kind of nonchalantly mentioned that it was their anniversary that day. And they'd been married for over 50 years. Tim didn't even know that it was their anniversary. So after they left, I really needed to understand this because I still remember my parents' anniversary, and they've been divorced 20 plus years. My mother has since passed away, but it's something that is etched in my mind along with my home phone number, my childhood address. Tim, though, told me that these things weren't really celebrated, like birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. Of course, me being me, I bombarded him with questions and speculations as to why they didn't celebrate special occasions. What it came down to, though, was that these days often brought on a ton of stress, which would lead to arguments between his parents. So much so that after a while, he just wanted to pretend that these special days didn't exist, as if they were just any other day of the week, as to not provoke the stress and arguments. What happened was a part of him associated these days with stress, anxiety, arguments, and would rather avoid them altogether. This part became conditioned to not celebrate or look forward to these special days. All of this really helped me understand him so much better. I finally realized why he didn't think it was a big deal to celebrate our anniversary, even though it was important to me to celebrate. But then I realized a part of me was also conditioned, just in a different way. These yearly occasions were big deals in my household, at least for my mother, who tried hard to make our birthday special and wanted other days to be special as well, like our anniversary, even though my dad fell short with it. Like in Tim's household growing up, this also brought on arguments on some of these special days. Although I perceived it differently than he did, this could be because there wasn't stress and arguments on some of the occasions, only the ones related to my parents. So this mention at dinner that night and the conversation that followed helped me reflect on why things are important to me and why it hurt so much when it didn't seem important to Tim. My part viewed it as a replay of watching my mother feel sad and hurt when my father didn't live up to her expectations, ultimately leading up to a divorce. This part is afraid that this will happen because Tim is seemingly responding the same way my father had to my mother. But now I have a better understanding of why he's doing this. It has absolutely nothing to do with me. It's his conditioning. Just like it's my conditioning that I took it personally. And I tell you that little situation, that story, because I just want to make it clear we're all holding baggage. We're all conditioned in so many ways that play out in our day-to-day lives. We don't even realize what is happening until we step back and reflect on it. Follow that thread, as I like to say, and see where the root is. This gives us an abundant amount of information. Even thinking about behaviors like people-pleasing, going into caretaker mode, and codependency. These are parts that have somehow learned that they need to act in a way in order to be loved. And it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship either. These behaviors can pop up in all areas, interpersonal relationships, friendships, work, with like bosses, coworkers, even neighbors. When we push against the conditioning, it feels uncomfortable. This is only because the parts aren't following the same pattern, the same cycle. The fear of the unknown becomes very prevalent. Even though they aren't happy in these patterns and cycles, they are comfortable with this conditioning. They would rather be comfortable than sitting in discomfort. But discomfort is where we grow. Let's look at this through like a neuroscience lens. Because of conditioning and programming, neural pathways in our brain were created. Neural pathways are a result of our thoughts, our behaviors. This is how habits are formed, how we learn things. And as we learn new things, it makes new pathways. And as we continue to practice whatever we've learned, that pathway becomes stronger. Patterns in our thoughts and behaviors are due to these neural pathways being created and strengthened. For instance, if we have only seen relationships that are unhealthy, we usually gravitate to those same types of relationships because this is what our brain understands, knows, and feels comfortable in. But if we get into a healthy relationship, there are no neural pathways to guide us, no pattern. This is where it can feel uncomfortable for our parts. Our parts like to know what's up. When something is new, our parts get thrown off. They try to resist, thinking that this is the only way they know, wanting to stay in that conditioned pathway, even if it's not the healthiest. It's considered the quote-unquote safest. But it doesn't mean there is anything wrong. It just means that our brains need to make new neural pathways. So there's nothing wrong with like that healthy relationship if you feel uncomfortable. It's just, you have to just expand more. And the great thing is that we have neuroplasticity. Our brain constantly makes new neural pathways without us even realizing it. We have new experiences, learn new information, we make new memories. Our brain is always adapting and making new pathways. Our brain is always changing. We just need to reassure the parts that this is okay, that the system as a whole is safe as we pivot, change, adapt, and grow. We can help our parts break the patterns and cycles from the programming and conditioning. We can use the past as a guide to our present and our future. We can look to the past to understand why we subconsciously block our manifestations. Now, I know there are a lot of people out there who don't like looking at their past. They often judge themselves for getting caught up on something that has happened so long ago. And I've heard time and time again, the past is in the past, or the past doesn't bother me. This is a part, by the way, usually a rational part that it really believes it because it is actually in the present with you. And so it's can't figure out why the parts from the past are having issues still. The other parts haven't gotten the memo. And if they did from this part, they wouldn't listen to it because the parts won't listen to other parts. They only listen to true self. But the past is where all of this is held. And like I said before, the parts are usually kind of stuck in the past, reliving these moments where the conditioning, the programming, and all of that is. So I ask you this. What if we stopped judging ourselves? Just because we got caught up in the past, in those patterns and cycles of conditioning, and instead use it as an opportunity to further expand ourselves to who we want to be in the present and future, and recognize that it's just the brain doing what it does. But thank God for neuroplasticity. It's these seemingly small things that could bring so much light into a past hurt that continues to control how we think of ourselves and the world and our interactions with others. Our moving forward with the dreams, hopes, and goals we're trying to manifest. You might wonder, Angel, what do you do from here? I'll start by telling you this. This is what I did. I worked with those parts of me, healing the vulnerable parts, unblending from the protector parts, and giving them new jobs or roles. I built trust and a relationship between these parts and my true self, so they would allow true self me to be in the lead. Is it perfect? No. But again, perfection's a myth. We will never be perfect. But if we can work with our parts so that they will trust that true self us knows what's best, and it does intuitively, then those parts will no longer block us from manifesting the love we want. We will also no longer be trying to recreate past scenarios for these so-called do-overs, because that part will no longer need that like external validation. It can and will get everything it needs from true self. And if you want to start now, you can notice something small in your life, something that might cause discomfort or a reaction within you, and see if you can follow that thread to the part of you that's holding on to something, but it doesn't need to anymore. Then you can practice self-compassion to gain awareness and insight into your internal world. It can be hard to unblend from a part at first. However, if you can reflect on this afterwards, like if something happens, you feel like a part has blended, and then after you're like, oh crap, I had this reaction that I'm not thrilled about. Follow that thread Just see what activated the part. Don't let the other parts come in doing the shaming or the criticizing or anything like that, the judging, none of that. Just follow the thread. Feelings, like notice your thoughts, notice your feelings, your body sensations that came up before or as the part was blending. This gives you insight on how to catch it sooner down the line. And when you show yourself compassion, that means true self is present. This is when our perspective shifts, free from judgment. If there is judgment, like I said, this is the critical part. Ask it to step aside so you can reflect without all of that. This is how you can become aware of your parts and start taking the lead as true self. And that's the magic of our true self. We have the ability inside of us to heal ourselves, to right the wrongs, break the patterns and cycles from past programming and conditioning, to feel internally lovable and worthy. This is when you become aligned and connected to the universe and when you become unstoppable. And who doesn't want that, right? Oh. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode today. I feel like there was a lot of information. I think I get it's been a minute, right? Like I haven't been on, like this is like the first time since the summer hiatus, and I kind of got a little excited. So I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, you can always email me, angel@trueselfmanifestation.com. It's also in the show notes. And always check out the show notes because there's a lot of great stuff there. So I hope you all have a great day. Take care. Happy manifesting. Thank you for listening to the True Self Manifestation Podcast. Check out the show notes for any links mentioned on this episode. And while you're there, grab my free guide on how to tap into your intuition. This is the foundation to any manifestation practice. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And please leave a review where you listen to podcasts. And if you love this episode, share it with a friend. Thanks again. See you soon.